Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. We've got Sam McQuillan with us today from Legal Sports Report. We'll dive into this Jontay Porter story, which continues to move on. Seems like Porter's trying to find some ways out of going to jail, to be honest with you. We'll get to that. But first, let's bring in Sam. Sam, great to have you back here on the show. A lot to discuss here with Washington, D.C. and sports betting, going offline, going online, new companies joining as well. Everyone wants a piece of the pie in our nation's capital. Let's get an update on the very latest there. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Craig, great to be back. And Washington, D.C., when you talk about it as a city or a state, it's really unique that way. And it's been no different with their sports betting experience, unparalleled to pretty much any other market in the country, where they had this one app for a while that was really bad, but they allowed different apps around stadiums, got rid of the app, allowed a new app. The app went offline during the Super Bowl. It's been just quite a fiasco with DC sports betting thus far. But this week, it seems like the dust is finally settling about 4 years after they legalized it. But it didn't take, it wasn't without some drama first, of course. So what happened basically was you had FanDuel had taken over this contract for the lottery, was running the only game in town. And then all of a sudden it went offline this week because of changes in the upcoming fiscal budget for the year 2025. They made some pretty significant sports betting alterations to the entire market. But when the mayor, Muriel Bowser, was holding on to this budget essentially and had not made a decision on whether she would sign it or send it back, that caused all of a sudden all the changes to take a pause. FanDuel automatically had to go offline. It was sort of this unforeseen error, which is pretty symptomatic of the entire process in DC in general. It's always some little thing gets in the way that nobody saw. But she returned the budget yesterday, which allowed FanDuel to go back online. The Office of Lottery and Gaming worked with FanDuel, as well as some new apps that are going to be ushered into the market here because of changes in the budget. Like I said earlier, before today, you really only had one game in town, which back when you had Gambit DC used to be the only one in town. It was really a problem for a lot of bettors there. It lost the city a lot of money. As a former DC resident, I can attest to how bad the lines were. It was like minus 160 sides on both sides of NFL games. So it was a really uncompetitive product. A lot of studies came out that found it lost the city money. FanDuel now is back, and with it comes Caesars, comes BetMGM. So for the first time ever, Washington, D.C. residents are going to be able to bet on essentially more than one app. So pretty big news in D.C. there. You've kind of been waiting 4 years for anything like this to happen. FanDuel took over in April, which was some progress. And then the D.C. Council made this change, and it was finally put into place this week. So hopefully it's going to be smooth sailing ahead for D.C. sports betting, but you never know with this market, which again is just very unique. Now, DraftKings has also showed some interest in launching in D.C. They have not been approved yet, even though they've been vocal on social media about coming to D.C. soon. We'll have to see what happens with them. Fanatics also has a path to launching in D.C., which would leave pretty much 2 more open spots. I'm not sure who would fill those, quite frankly. However, though, with the current environment in sports betting, maybe Bet365, maybe ESPN Bet if it's still around. We'll have to see, Craig.
Yeah, and I think that right now it's a market to watch, fair to say. Now, a story to watch is this Jontay Porter. To me, I mean, I understand what Jontay Porter is trying to do, Sam. It's a cash grab. He's trying to go overseas to get paid, to make some money, probably for legal fees, et cetera. What's the very latest here with Porter?
Yeah, so Porter, the former Toronto Raptors big man and brother of Denver Nuggets star Michael Porter Jr., who was banned for life earlier this year for essentially manipulating his play during NBA games to sort of wipe out a gambling debt he had. Basically, the cardinal sin, throwing games or throwing your performance, was banned from basketball. Now he is still tied up in federal court. He's already pled guilty to some charges, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud. But what he was doing here was essentially trying to save his own skin, like you say, Craig, is asking a federal judge if he can leave the country and go play professional basketball in Greece while the rest of this legal process plays out. He's got another court date in December where he's going to have to be arraigned. They're going to have to figure out his sentence. But as part of the entire, as part of his crime, he could very well face 4 to 5 years in prison, as well as a lofty fine. So what this would involve was giving him his passport back, allowing him to not only live in Greece with his family, but travel all over Europe and then come back for court dates. So a federal judge said, I don't really think that's tenable here. Porter's argument was, I have a limited window as a basketball player, as an athlete, to make money doing this sport I love. He also cited the fact that, he left college early to go play basketball in the NBA. Obviously, a privilege that he squandered with this whole gambling scenario. But the judge came out and said, I don't really think that this is something that I'm going to allow. Now we'll have to see kind of where the process goes from here. But a very big cautionary tale to anyone who wants to is swayed in one way with sports betting. And this is kind of the extreme we've seen so far, with not only him being banned for life in the league he plays in, but also facing 5 years in prison and then not being able to play anywhere else during it. So, the story continues to be one of the biggest ones we've seen in this whole scandal kind of space.
Yeah, it is. And what's interesting to me, Sam, is that there is a team overseas that's willing to placate this. When you really think about it, in the end, it's kind of crazy, maybe looking for attention. I can't think of anything else. Speaking of attention, ESPN Bet thought they were going to smack ESPN's logo on a betting app, and all of a sudden people were just going to flock to it. Sam, this looks like it's going the other way. I don't know where things are headed here, but, certainly the idea that they're going to jump into FanDuel and DraftKings territory doesn't seem reasonable. I think the only reasonable question to ask is, can they just maintain where they're at?
Yeah, Craig, definitely a reasonable question. Maintain where they're at, or even exist when we hop on this show next time. It was another day, another bad headline for Penn Entertainment. Yesterday, my colleague Matt Waters broke the news that they laid off a significant amount of their workforce, and NBC just came out today saying it was actually 100 people they laid off. My colleague Matt, in his article, detailed that a lot of that had to do with the part of the company that runs ESPN Bet. Obviously, Penn Entertainment has that partnership where they're running ESPN Bet. So it couldn't have really come at a worse time for Penn, even though this is never a good time to be laying off all of your online sports betting workforce. But they have second quarter earnings coming up next week where they're going to have to field a ton of questions. There's a push from a huge growing group of activist investors to sell the company because of how bad the online sports betting business has been for them. If you recall, they paid $3 billion to use the ESPN Bet brand after selling back Barstool to founder Dave Portnoy for $1. Another brand it paid $500 million for, and it also spent $2 billion trying to build out its own technology, which obviously has not worked because a lot of people are not staying on the app. So it has just 3% of market share so far, which is a far cry from the 10 to 12% it's been aiming for. It seems like this is all coming at a really bad time, especially when the CEO, Jay Snowden, has said, no, it'll be okay. Just wait till football season. We have some more integrations coming. We have a lot kind of on the rise with how we're going to involve ESPN. But at this point, they might not even make it till football season, with everyone clamoring for them to sell, and obviously them laying off a ton of the workforce that was dedicated to this very project. It's really kind of a crazy story to think 11 months ago they paid or obligated the $3 billion for ESPN, and now this is where we are less than a year later talking about them selling, getting rid of ESPN. And ESPN's one of the biggest brands. If they can't do that with them, who could they do it with?
Yeah, it's a fair question to ask, Sam. Many questions ahead, and that's crazy that we would think that by next week something could happen here. That's insane. All right, well, Sam, we'll see what happens next week. I mean, football season's coming, so I'm sure that they're hoping they're still in action. Thanks again, Sam, for coming on the show.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Craig.